Peace and blessings be upon you all. Thank you so much for coming tonight. So the video essentially is about the 9 young men who've been recently arrested in Minneapolis, sentenced to very inhumane and cruel sentences, one of which is my brother. There have been, I can give an outline of basically the case while this is being pulled up. Essentially what the video hopes to show is kind of the humane side and opposite and alternate narrative to what the media shows them as. And you know, knowing my brother and knowing all of his friends, we know that they are not who the media says they are. They are not the terrorists that they indict them as. So essentially the case plays out as my brother was 19 years old at the time. He was going to college. He was working full nights as a security guard at a women's shelter, a battered women's shelter. And he spent his nights doing that and pretty much all of his days working and going to college. This was kind of the same theme for pretty much the remainder of his 6 friends. The group was a little bit bigger, a little bit less than that. And essentially they were used to all kind of, play basketball, hang out after college, go to eateries and things like that. And when the FBI targeted them for showing a sense of religiosity and an interest in their religion, and made one of their friends an informant and paid them thousands of dollars in order to entrap the remainder of his friends. And so they equipped him with a recording device and essentially told him to provoke, them by showing them videos of, ISIS soldiers and showing them basically a bunch of videos and having them kind of speak about it and give reflections. So they basically, and a lot of the affidavit, if you take a look at it, is pretty absurd because it goes from talking about, do you want to go to IHOP? Do you want to go to B-dubs? Hey, do you want to go play ball? Did you see Katy Perry last night on, and then all of a sudden it goes, the informant goes, hey, I've got this, new video, do you guys want to see it? And then they're like watching this video and kind of, boasting their manliness and whatever. And that's essentially what they're indicted for, thought crimes. None of these young men, my brother included, they've never committed a misdemeanor in their entire life. They don't have any criminal records in their entire life. They were all 19, 20, and 21. None of them were older than 21 years old. They were all like very, very talented, ran a lot of, youth groups, were, involved in student clubs at their college campuses. My brother had an internship with an IT internship with Genesis and worked at the hospital he was born in HCMC in downtown Minneapolis. They had a lot going for their lives, and they were indicted on, conspiracy to aid a foreign terrorist organization. The proceedings were long. A lot of them, came with witnesses that, they brought witnesses from really arbitrary places and places that didn't make any sense. Like, they would go paintballing and they would bring the person who controlled the paintball field and tell them, they look like they were on battlefield and training to kill people. This is a paintball field. This is what young men do on their free time. They brought him in court and used him as evidence. They would look at their Facebook pages and, see that one of them has got a lion as a Facebook profile picture, and therefore, a lion is somehow, a representative of jihad and representative of terrorism and representative of ISIS. The prosecution team got away with a lot. And because, they're basically speaking a government narrative in these very, basically well-carved words. These young men were all found guilty by a jury who was, none of them represented their peers. My brother got, and they did just split them apart. And so essentially what happened was my brother and the remainder of his friends were told, to plead guilty. And because the government doesn't ever want to take anything to trial because it's very expensive for them and it just kind of endures a lot of work, they want them to take a plea bargain. And none of the boys wanted to take a plea bargain because they were like, we're going to win this case. There's nothing they have against us except these flimsy recordings. And they basically all were initially going to go to trial, and the government realized this and basically told them that they were going to add a new charge, which was conspiracy to commit murder abroad. This charge is very rarely seen in any of these cases and carried a sentence from 60 to life. And so it really was giving them an ultimatum and giving them kind of, making them play Jeopardy with their lives, really. You either go to trial and try and prove your innocence, or and may very well get a charge that's 60 to life. A few of these boys were not given the opportunity to plead guilty, and this is kind of the way the government plays. They break them up into factions and they, pit them against one another. 2 of the 9 men cooperated with the government, and one of them got time served, and the next one got 3 years. My brother was the third who pled guilty but did not cooperate, and he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was 19 at the time. He was sentenced in November. 2 others pled guilty. They also got 10 years. And the ones who didn't plead guilty and went through a trial got 30, 30, and 35 years. This is basically a video that I made. We made in kind of tribute and in an effort to keep their good legacy alive and their good efforts. As a result, the community has been very much broken apart. Law enforcement and the community have a hard time trusting one another. This is a video kind of, we told them, because they were all like very good basketball players, we told them that we were going to hold a basketball game in their honor. And they called us from prison and we recorded them kind of, and we made a video of basically showing all of their good life, and we have their audios played, and so this is the video. I hope you guys enjoy it. So I'm going to quickly go over this and give many of them a chance to speak. Now that you guys are kind of familiar with the case, it's very depthy. I'm sure maybe we'll have a Q&A session to ask for specifics if that's a need. But I'm going to read a poem that I wrote the night before the sentence. We held a night of prayer. It was a vigil-like prayer at a mosque to essentially pray all night and make supplications that these young men would get low sentences. And then I'm just going to go ahead and detail just kind of a few things after that. This poem essentially looks at how reporters are sometimes very gleeful when they're asking you questions, very hard questions. So I'll read it in that perspective. And it goes like this. Question number 1. What is it like to be in prison? I wonder what it's like to be in prison. For the 2x2 cubicle to be your haven amidst rising to the thumping footsteps of 200 shackled ankles signaling you to breakfast. For muffled whimpers of mighty men made of ivory and tusk blanket you to sleep. And in the same way you crane your neck to the winding roads of a car race video game in hopes of getting ahead, they too press palms against all too thick glass panes in hopes of seeing a single ray of sun. a speck of clouds. What flavor is wind on bittersweet tongue? Does rain soothe a fevered body? Do ribs pierce each other when loneliness becomes like an empty well? We are hopeless. We are broken records splintered with so many versions of what if. Question number 2, what is it like at home? If all the bodies on God's vast green earth could lie atop the comforters of my brother's bed, it would still remain empty. There are nights I count the amount of times my baby brother asks me when the void will be filled again. Sometimes I monologue with his witticism. Sometimes I Snapchat a ridiculous photo to beloved Ummah, perhaps it'll read opened. Question number 3, what is it like when they took him away? Hurt feels like a ball of yarn whose beginning you cannot find. Hurt feels like shards of your favorite china you cannot piece back together. Like a mother whispering defeat between bloodshot eyes and hiccuping cries. Like an entire country invaded us. Question number 4, what do you hope to see? His face. Palms of different colors and languages clasped for the sake of his face. A human face for a living body. Limbs attached to beings both fragile and strong, kneeling in prostration or in common struggle. This is what I envision. As one of my favorite West African poets says, so here you are, too foreign for home and too foreign for here, and never enough for both. This is what life is like. It's a process of self-discovery, and this is how my brother felt when he was growing up. When he wore his traditional white gown on Fridays to prayer and attempted to grab a bite at the local McDonald's, he was spat at, yelled at to go back home. Unbeknownst to them, he was born just a few miles away. This is the only home he's ever known. Imagine owning a blue passport, having your baby feet imprinted on decaying papyrus-like paper, warming by the campfire during the chill nights of summer, and taking to the hills in the bleak winters of Minnesota, stressing about college finals, discovering detours and eateries in the cuts, kicking it with friends, barbecuing, basking in the sun with family. Yet somehow, some way, amidst doing all of this, you're still not American enough. Since my brother's incarceration, we've been approached by one too many reporters keen on seeking an exclusive insider to exploit with bold headlines the following morning. If they were eager or persistent enough, then perhaps even the same evening. It was a learning experience for us, being able to decipher which reporter externally seemed truthful enough to tell our story without warping it. And how do you do this? How do you look at someone's eyes and hear them speak so fondly of your culture, the foods you eat, how many Somali people they know in your community, and not trust them? I'd always thought having trust issues was a consequence of being betrayed by people whom you were more than just acquainted with. But I was wrong. And Cedar Riverside is a bustling, lively neighborhood in the inner city that has become a haven for many of my people post the civil war in Somalia. After being born in North Minneapolis, it was also the second place my family and I relocated to and called home for a few years. So when Fox 9 reporter Peg Hegseth took to the streets of my former neighborhood and harshly interrogated people strolling in the streets to the local grocer or having a cup of coffee with friends at the street corner, and he asked them, why is Minnesota a hotbed for terrorists? The survival mechanism in my first generation aunties, uncles, and grandparents is to say, I don't speak English, and lucid English. And this is the same interview that concludes with the anchor asking, why have so many Somalis relocated to Minnesota? To which the easy answer would be to seek refuge from war. But to which Hegseth decided to reply, in many ways, Lutheran social services, good welfare benefits, a welcoming environment for all the right reasons. The problem is, there hasn't been the kind of assimilation that you would want necessarily, and not for a lack of outreach. That's where the concern comes from. Assimilation means the process of becoming similar to something. The question then begs, similar to what? America isn't a homogeneous body, and its culture is no reflection of the indigenous people. Many are immigrants and attempt to balance their intersectionality of being American, being Arab, being Irish or Somali, of attempting to balance both identities and evade scrutiny and suspicion. For some people, assimilation means annihilation of our culture. For example, I used to be a frequent rider of public transportation, mainly because the campus I attended then was smack in the middle of downtown, and besides not wanting to sit in morning traffic for half your morning, you also didn't want to get overcharged for parking. I remember distinctly being in the backseat of the bus on my way home one evening, sitting across from what seemed to be an artist sketching in his pad. From my peripheral vision, I could see him glancing my way many more times than I could count, so naturally I looked over, and he used the opportunity to give me a work of his. A drawing of Jesus and a few biblical verses. I was used to metro missionaries, so I accepted his drawing and thanked him for it. He started talking then, so I removed my headphones to hear better. "You should believe in Jesus," he said. To which I smiled and said, "Oh, but I do believe in Jesus." The shock that registered on his face was almost hysterical, so I elaborated. "Muslims believe in him as a prophet sent from God, the same way you believe in him as God. In fact, we have a whole chapter in the Quran dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus." He looked skeptic, so I pulled out the mini English translation of the Quran I carry around and showed it to him. He fiercely shook his head, grabbed the line to signal a stop, yelled, "Go to hell," at the top of his lungs, and exited through the back door. Naturally, I was stunned and embarrassed that the remainder of the bus was now staring at me. And it stunned me more than anything that I'd done absolutely nothing to irk him besides being Muslim. I'd always been someone to take things lightheartedly, and this despite my parents' warning and precautions to stay safe, because the world wasn't safe for a young Muslim American African girl. That incident drove me from seeing safety in riding the Metro Transit, and seeing the seriousness in investing in a car despite overpriced parking fees, and painfully realizing that the wolf isn't necessarily stronger in its pack, that sometimes people will be complacent to injustices perpetuated onto their neighbor. Similarly, there's a lack of trust in my community. We like to think we're all heroes in the face of injustice, but the truth is you'll never really know where you stand until you're afflicted with a mishap. 7 young men ranging ages 19 to 21, all friends, were incarcerated to 10 to 35 years, and as a response, the former U.S. Attorney Andrew Lugar took reason in perpetuating an already existing stereotype and attempting to initiate a program titled CVE, Countering Violent Extremism. A program that only targets Muslim communities and is both stigmatizing and alienating because it furthers the assumption that American Muslims are not fully invested in honoring our religious and civic duties to this nation. Also, in light of the case of my brother, Catherine Bigelow took the liberty in producing a show in our city titled Mogadishu, Minnesota, which has a Somali character, and coincidence, absolute coincidence, playing a role of a terrorist in Minnesota, and another stigma for the thousands of young, talented Somali youth who beg to be known as anything but. Just last week, I visited my brother, and as I sat across from him, I realized that I was looking at the bitter fruit of growing up in a society that marginalizes us, pigeonholes us as terrorists and extremists, and I'm left with the daunting question of, what will be the fate of my younger siblings, friends, and community members in the coming years as they attempt to navigate the world in a time where Trump is setting the tone about Muslims? Thank you.